From the time Jane married Henry, Chapuis could not wait to speak to her about bringing the Lady Mary back into the folds of the court and reconciling her with her father. He made a point of telling her how all of the country wanted this, and that she would make such an incredible daughter, a better daughter than she could even have herself, which is an interesting thing to say to someone who's actively trying to give the king an heir. We believe that Anne speak some French, so she certainly understood at least some of what Chapuis was saying, but she did promise to attempt to intercede. Jane had made a promise to herself that she was going to be a docile and obedient wife, serving the king and not getting involved in politics. But in terms of being a stepmother and in terms of the Lady Mary, this was something that she couldn't avoid and couldn't turn her back on. Now, it's important to remember before we assume that Jane did lots for Mary and treated the baby Elizabeth, the Princess Elizabeth, badly, that Jane and Mary were reasonably close in age. Mary would have been about 20 years old at this point, and Jane wouldn't have been more than 6 or 8 years older than her. So it's much easier for them to form a bond, and obviously they've got a history together back when Jane was a lady in Catherine's court, in Mary's mother's circle of ladies. So they've got a history there. They've known each other a fairly long time. They haven't seen each other since 1531, but they already have that connection. In terms of Elizabeth, who's only a couple of years old, it's not unusual that she wouldn't be around. She was already off with her own household, away from court, just as she would have been if her mother was still alive. So it's not unusual that Jane wouldn't have had a huge amount to do with her anyway, regardless of what her feelings may or may not have been towards Elizabeth and her mother. But at this point, to start with anyway, Elizabeth is still the legal heir to the throne. Henry stops that in 1536, and now both Mary and Elizabeth are bastards, and neither one can inherit the throne. This does actually endear Mary somewhat towards Elizabeth. She's not a great threat to her anymore. Someone that is a bit of a threat is Henry Fitzroy, Henry's illegitimate son. However, he then dies in the summer of 1536 himself, so he's no longer a threat. He could have been a threat to Jane. Had Jane had a child and Henry later die, it might have meant that Jane didn't then get to be regent, that it may have been Henry Fitzroy instead. But I think, knowing Jane's brothers, we know very well who would have probably stepped in and taken that regency anyway. So while the death of Henry Fitzroy was a huge loss for Henry, Jane didn't necessarily grieve too greatly. Jane did suggest to Henry that Mary might be reinstated as heir, maybe rejoin the family at court. Henry, unsurprisingly, wasn't all that happy about this suggestion, so she tried a different tactic. Jane, one day, acting very upset and sad, waiting patiently, and it happens. Henry asks her, "What is wrong, dearest?" To which she replies, "I just wish Lady Mary could be at court." And of course Henry says, of course she can be at court. She's just got to agree to every single thing I say. So off go his men with the list of things that Mary needs to agree to, and she obviously refuses. And this whole situation is a story for another day. If you've seen Wolf Hall, you'll be well versed in it. She needs to agree that her father is the head of church. She needs to agree that her mother was never legally married to her father, etc., etc. She doesn't do it. Eventually, when it's looking like Henry might make the decision for her, she does agree. But with this, that means that Jane gets to formally welcome her as her stepdaughter, and she suggests to Henry that they visit. So in July, off they go to visit Mary, and Jane embraces her and gives her a diamond ring. And before she knows it, she has a household, and in the autumn of that year, she is back at court and forming a deep and meaningful friendship with Jane. We can't, however, for obvious reasons, say it was a long-lasting friendship. But for the time Jane was here, they were certainly very close, and you can only imagine how grateful Mary must have been to her new stepmother. As always, don't forget that you can follow my work. You can follow these videos and my various other Tudor Tales other Tudor Tale videos on patreon.com/Tudor Tales. You can also find me on TikTok and follow my PhD work on Instagram. Please do like this video, and it would make my day if you would subscribe. I will see you tomorrow for more Jane Seymour.